The German Confederation was a loose association of 39 German states in Central Europe, created by the Congress of Vienna in 1815 to coordinate the economies of separate German-speaking countries and to replace the former Holy Roman Empire. According to historian Lloyd E. Lee, most historians have judged the Confederation to be weak and ineffective, as well as an obstacle to German nationalist aspirations. It collapsed due to the rivalry between Prussia and Austria, warfare, the 1848 revolution, and the inability of the multiple members to compromise. It dissolved after the Prussian victory in the 7 Weeks' War and the establishment of the North German Confederation in 1866. In 1848, revolutions by liberals and nationalists were a failed attempt to establish a unified German state. Talks between the German states failed in 1848, and the Confederation briefly dissolved but was re-established in 1850. The dispute between the two dominant member states of the Confederation, Austria and Prussia, over which had the inherent right to rule German lands, ended in favor of Prussia after the Austro-Prussian War in 1866, and the collapse of the Confederation. This resulted in the creation of the North German Confederation, with a number of South German states remaining independent, although allied first with Austria and subsequently with Prussia, after which they became a part of the new German Empire. History. Background: the War of the Third Coalition lasted from about 1803 to 1806. Following defeat of the Battle of Austerlitz by the French under Napoleon in December 1805, Emperor Francis II abdicated, and the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved on 6 August 1806. The resulting Treaty of Pressburg established the Confederation of the Rhine in July 1806, joining together 16 of France's allies among the German states. After the Battle of Jena-Auschwitz of October 1806 in the War of the Fourth Coalition, various other German states, including Saxony and Westphalia, also joined the Confederation. Only Austria, Prussia, Danish Holstein, Swedish Pomerania and the Principality of Erfurt stayed outside the Confederation of the Rhine. These nations would later join in the War of the Sixth Coalition from 1812 to 1814. Establishment: the German Confederation was created by the Ninth Act of the Congress of Vienna on 8 June 1815 after being alluded to in Article 6 of the 1814 Treaty of Paris, ending the War of the Sixth Coalition. The Confederation was formally created by a second treaty, the final act of the Ministerial Conference to complete and consolidate the organization of the German Confederation. This treaty was not concluded and signed by the parties until 15 May 1820. States joined the German Confederation by becoming parties to the Second Treaty. The states designated for inclusion in the Confederation in the 1815 treaty were Austrian Empire, Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, Hanover, Württemberg, Baden, Electorate of Hesse, Grand Duchy of Hesse, Holstein and Lauenburg, held by Denmark, Luxembourg, held by the Netherlands, Brunswick, Mecklenburg-Schwerin, Nassau, Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, Saxe-Gotha, Saxe-Coburg, Saxe-Meiningen, Saxe-Hildburghausen, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Holstein-Oldenburg, Anhalt-Dessau, Anhalt-Bernburg, Anhalt-Cothen, Schwarzburg-Sondershausen, Schwarzburg-Rudolstadt, Hohenzollern-Hechingen, Liechtenstein, Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen, Waldeck, Reuss, Elderlein, Reuss, Jungerlein, Schaumburg-Lippe, Lippe-Detmold. When the 1820 treaty was concluded, the following states were also included: Hesse-Homburg, Lübeck, Frankfurt, Bremen, Hamburg. In 1839, as a compensation for the loss of the province of Luxembourg to Belgium, the Duchy of Limburg was created and it was a member of the German Confederation until its dissolution in 1866. Disillusion and empire. The German Confederation ended as a result of the Austro-Prussian War of 1866 between the constituent Confederation entities of the Austrian Empire and its allies on one side and the Kingdom of Prussia and its allies on the other. The war resulted in the Confederation being partially replaced by a North German Confederation in 1867, which included Prussia but excluded Austria and the South German states. During November 1870, the four southern states joined the North German Confederation by treaty. On 10 December 1870, the North German Confederation Reichstag renamed the Confederation as the German Empire and gave the title of German Emperor to the King of Prussia as President of the Confederation. During the Siege of Paris on 18 January 1871, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was proclaimed German Emperor in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. Members: the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia were the largest and by far the most powerful members of the Confederation. Large parts of both countries were not included in the Confederation, because they had not been part of the former Holy Roman Empire, nor had the greater parts of their armed forces been incorporated in the Federal Army. Austria and Prussia each had one vote in the Federal Assembly. 3 member states were ruled by foreign monarchs. The King of Denmark as Duke of Holstein, the King of the Netherlands as Grand Duke of Luxembourg and Duke of Limburg, and the King of Great Britain as King of Hanover were members of the German Confederation. Each of them had a vote in the Federal Assembly. 6 other greater states had one vote each in the Federal Assembly. The King of Bavaria, the King of Saxony, the King of Württemberg, the Elector of Hesse, the Grand Duke of Baden and the Grand Duke of Hesse. 23 smaller and tiny member states shared 5 votes in the Federal Assembly. The 4 free cities of Bremen, Frankfurt, Hamburg, and Lübeck shared one vote in the Federal Assembly. Ethnic composition. Despite its name and intention, the German Confederation was not wholly German in terms of the populations of its member states, though certainly containing a majority of Germans among its members. There were many other ethnic groups present within the boundaries of the Confederation. In south and southeast of Austria there were Italians and Slovenians, and most of the lands of the Bohemian Crown were inhabited by Czechs. In Silesia there was a large Polish minority, and within Saxony and Brandenburg the Serbs were present. Situation in history. Between 1806 and 1815, Napoleon organized the German states into the Confederation of the Rhine, but this collapsed after his defeats in 1812 to 1815. The German Confederation had roughly the same boundaries as the Empire at the time of the French Revolution. The member states, drastically reduced to 39 from more than 300 under the Holy Roman Empire, were recognized as fully sovereign. The members pledged themselves to mutual defense, and jointly maintained the fortresses at Mainz, the city of Luxembourg, Rastatt, Ulm, and Landau. A federal assembly under Austrian presidency met in Frankfurt. During the Revolution of 1848–49, the German Confederation was inactive. It was revived in 1850 under Austrian presidency, but rivalry between Prussia and Austria grew more and more. The Confederation was dissolved in 1866 after the Austro-Prussian War, and was succeeded in 1866 by the Prussian-dominated North German Confederation. Unlike the German Confederation, the North German Confederation was in fact a true state. Its territory comprised the parts of the German Confederation north of the River Main, plus Prussia's eastern territories and the Duchy of Schleswig, but excluded Austria and the other southern German states. Prussia's influence was widened by the Franco-Prussian War, resulting in the proclamation of the German Empire at Versailles on 18 January 1871, which united the North German Federation with the southern German states. All the constituent states of the former German Confederation became part of the Kaiserreich in 1871, except Austria, Luxembourg, the Duchy of Limburg and Liechtenstein. Impact of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic invasions. The late 18th century was a period of political, economic, intellectual, and cultural reforms, the Enlightenment, but also involving early Romanticism, and climaxing with the French Revolution, where freedom of the individual and nation was asserted against privilege and custom. Representing a great variety of types and theories, they were largely a response to the disintegration of previous cultural patterns, coupled with new patterns of production, specifically the rise of industrial capitalism. However, the defeat of Napoleon enabled conservative and reactionary regimes such as those of the Kingdom of Prussia, the Austrian Empire and Tsarist Russia to survive, laying the groundwork for the Congress of Vienna and the alliance that strove to oppose radical demands for change ushered in by the French Revolution. The great powers at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 aimed to restore Europe to its pre-war conditions by combating both liberalism and nationalism, and by creating barriers around France. With Austria's position on the continent now intact and ostensibly secure under its reactionary premier Clemens von Metternich, the Habsburg Empire would serve as a barrier to contain the emergence of Italian and German nation-states as well, in addition to containing France. But this reactionary balance of power, aimed at blocking German and Italian nationalism on the continent, was precarious. After Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, the surviving member states of the defunct Holy Roman Empire joined to form the German Confederation, a rather loose organization, especially because the two great rivals, the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia, each feared domination by the other. In Prussia, the Hohenzollern rulers forged a centralized state. By the time of the Napoleonic Wars, Prussia was a socially and institutionally backward state, grounded in the virtues of its established military aristocracy, stratified by rigid hierarchical lines. After 1815, Prussia's defeats by Napoleonic France highlighted the need for administrative, economic, and social reforms to improve the efficiency of the bureaucracy and encourage practical merit-based education. Inspired by the Napoleonic organization of German and Italian principalities, the reforms of Karl August von Hardenberg and Count Stein were conservative, enacted to preserve aristocratic privilege while modernizing institutions. Outside Prussia, industrialization progressed slowly, and was held back because of political disunity, conflicts of interest between the nobility and merchants, and the continued existence of the guild system, which discouraged competition and innovation. While this kept the middle class at bay, affording the old order a measure of stability not seen in France. Prussia's vulnerability to Napoleon's military proved to many among the old order that a fragile, divided, and traditionalist Germany would be easy prey for its cohesive and industrializing neighbor. The reforms laid the foundation for Prussia's future military might by professionalizing the military and decreeing universal military conscription. In order to industrialize Prussia, working within the framework provided by the old aristocratic institutions, land reforms were enacted to break the monopoly of the Junkers on land ownership, thereby also abolishing, among other things, the feudal practice of serfdom. Romanticism, nationalism, and liberalism in the Weimar era. Although the forces unleashed by the French Revolution were seemingly under control after the Vienna Congress, the conflict between conservative forces and liberal nationalists was only deferred at best. The era until the failed 1848 revolution, in which these tensions built up, is commonly referred to as Weimar's, in reference to the outbreak of riots in March 1848. This conflict pitted the forces of the old order against those inspired by the French Revolution and the rights of man. The sociological breakdown of the competition was roughly, one side engaged mostly in commerce, trade and industry, and the other side associated with landowning aristocracy or military aristocracy in Prussia, the Habsburg monarchy in Austria, and the conservative notables of the small princely states and city-states in Germany. Meanwhile, demands for change from below had been fermenting since the influence of the French Revolution. Throughout the German Confederation, Austrian influence was paramount, drawing the ire of the nationalist movements. Metternich considered nationalism, especially the nationalist youth movement, the most pressing danger. German nationalism might not only repudiate Austrian dominance of the Confederation, but also stimulate nationalist sentiment within the Austrian Empire itself. In a multinational polyglot state in which Slavs and Magyars outnumbered the Germans, the prospects of Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, Polish, Serb, or Croatian sentiment along with middle-class liberalism were certainly horrifying. Figures like August Heinrich Hoffmann von Fallersleben, Ludwig Uhland, Georg Herweg, Heinrich Heine, Georg Buchner, Ludwig Born and Bettina von Arnim rose in the Vormars era. Father Friedrich Jahn's gymnastic associations exposed middle-class German youth to nationalist and democratic ideas, which took the form of the nationalistic and liberal democratic college fraternities known as the Burschenschaften. The Wartburg Festival in 1817 celebrated Martin Luther as a proto-German nationalist, linking Lutheranism to German nationalism, and helping arouse religious sentiments for the cause of German nationhood. The festival culminated in the burning of several books and other items that symbolized reactionary attitudes. One item was a book by August von Kotzebue. In 1819, Kotzebue was accused of spying for Russia, and then murdered by a theological student, Karl Ludwig Sand, who was executed for the crime. Sand belonged to a militant nationalist faction of the Burschenschaften. Metternich used the murder as a pretext to issue the Karlsbad Decrees of 1819, which dissolved the Burschenschaften, cracked down on the liberal press, and seriously restricted academic freedom. High culture German artists and intellectuals, heavily influenced by the French Revolution, turned to Romanticism. At the universities, high-powered professors developed international reputations, especially in the humanities led by history and philology, which brought a new historical perspective to the study of political history, theology, philosophy, language, and literature. With Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel in philosophy, Friedrich Schleiermacher in theology and Leopold von Ranke in history, the University of Berlin, founded in 1810, became the world's leading university. Von Ranke, for example, professionalized history and set the world standard for historiography. By the 1830s, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and biology had emerged with world-class science, led by Alexander von Humboldt in natural science and Carl Friedrich Gauss in mathematics. Young intellectuals often turned to politics, but their support for the failed revolution of 1848 forced many into exile. Population. Demographic transition. The population of the German Confederation grew 60% from 1815 to 1865, from 21 million to 34 million. The era saw the demographic transition take place in Germany. It was a transition from high birth rates and high death rates to low birth and death rates as the country developed from a pre-industrial to a modernized agriculture and supported a fast-growing industrialized urban economic system. In previous centuries, the shortage of land meant that not everyone could marry, and marriages took place after age 25. The high birth rate was offset by a very high rate of infant mortality, plus periodic epidemics and harvest failures. After 1815, increased agricultural productivity met a larger food supply, and a decline in famines, epidemics, and malnutrition. This allowed couples to marry earlier, and have more children. Arranged marriages became uncommon as young people were now allowed to choose their own marriage partners, subject to a veto by the parents. The upper and middle classes began to practice birth control, and a little later so too did the peasants. The population in 1800 was heavily rural, with only 8% of the people living in communities of 5,000 to 100,000 and another 2% living in cities of more than 100,000. Nobility in a heavily agrarian society, land ownership played a central role. Germany's nobles, especially those in the east called Junkers, dominated not only the localities, but also the Prussian court, and especially the Prussian army. Increasingly after 1815, a centralized Prussian government based in Berlin took over the powers of the nobles, which in terms of control over the peasantry had been almost absolute. They retained control of the judicial system on their estates until 1848, as well as control of hunting and game laws. They paid no land tax until 1861 and kept their police authority until 1872, and controlled church affairs into the early 20th century. To help the nobility avoid indebtedness, Berlin set up a credit institution to provide capital loans in 1809, and extended the loan network to peasants in 1849. When the German Empire was established in 1871, the nobility controlled the army and the navy, the bureaucracy, and the royal court. They generally set governmental policies. Peasants continued to center their lives in the village, where they were members of a corporate body and helped manage community resources and monitor community life. In the East, they were serfs who were bound prominently to parcels of land. In most of Germany, farming was handled by tenant farmers who paid rents and obligatory services to the landlord, who was typically a nobleman. Peasant leaders supervised the fields and ditches and grazing rights, maintained public order and morals, and supported a village court which handled minor offenses. Inside the family, the patriarch made all the decisions, and tried to arrange advantageous marriages for his children. Much of the village's communal life centered around church services and holy days. In Prussia, the peasants drew lots to choose conscripts required by the army. The noblemen handled external relationships and politics for the villages under their control, and were not typically involved in daily activities or decisions. Rapidly growing cities after 1815, the urban population grew rapidly, due primarily to the influx of young people from the rural areas. Berlin grew from 172,000 people in 1800 to 826,000 in 1870. Hamburg grew from 130,000 to 290,000. Munich from 40,000 to 269,000. Breslau from 60,000 to 208,000. Dresden from 60,000 to 177,000. Königsberg from 55,000 to 112,000. Offsetting this growth, there was extensive emigration, especially to the United States. Emigration totaled 480,000 in the 1840s, 1,200,000 in the 1850s, and 780,000 in the 1860s.